Welcome, everybody. I'm happy that you've joined me. We're doing Lightroom training. We've had a lot of questions from people, especially from people during photo walks at Joburg Photowalkers. And so basically, I discussed it with Mark, and we thought it might be good just to do some basic Lightroom training. Today's the first session, and we'll discuss especially the different versions of Lightroom, different options. Let me just get to the slide. That's me, Bertrand. Welcome to the training. I'm also going to keep some time for questions at the end. So let me get to this. Okay, so how does this work? I'm happy to have these sessions nice and social and interactive. So if you've got any questions, best place to do is pop them in the chat. So you'll see a lot of people have already started giving me answers on some questions in the chat while we were waiting. So you're welcome to put any questions there. I'm going to try and look at the chat every once in a while and just see if there's any questions as we move along. While we're doing the presentation itself, I'll basically have everybody on mute just because we want to get through this presentation as quickly as possible. Then there's, like I said, questions at the end, but as we go, I'm happy to see questions in the chat as well. And we're doing the recording. That's it. Let's keep going. Let me get out of my slides way. So basically, the background to this is we've got all these different options for editing images, and then obviously we've still got the option of not editing. That's a different option we've got, and we have to decide which software or which way of editing, or are we just going to stick with in-camera? And all these options are viable. And it's also not one solution for everybody. Your solution and my solution might be different. So I just want to give you a little bit of background on me and what type of photography I do, because my views on Lightroom and how I use it might be a little bit particular to me, and it might not apply to you. So knowing these things in advance will maybe inform your decision as well to make the right choices for your editing. Okay. I am a professional photographer, and don't let that fool you. The only thing professional means is I make money from it, pay the bills from it. It's really got nothing to do with quality or type of photography. That's professional, just means as a profession. So based on that, with that background, going through Lightroom and what we're going to be looking at, that means that I take a lot of photos every week, thousands of photos every week. I need to deliver images quite quickly to clients, and that would inform my choices in editing software and how I edit. So if you're doing something else, if you're doing fine art, if you're doing different genres of photography, a different solution might be applicable to you. But we'll go through the different options and the capabilities of Lightroom, and hopefully that'll help you make your decision as well. We're going to be looking at just a little bit of philosophy about editing and how I see editing and how I do my editing. We will look at why to choose Lightroom. So what's the other options, and also what Lightroom is really good at, because there's some things it's not good at, and there's obviously a lot of things that it's very good at. And we need to focus on these differences to make sure that we're using the right software and workflow for our process, because mainly photography is all about the workflow, from basically preparing for the shoot, doing the photo shoot, backing up images, making sure you transfer them, getting them onto a place where you're either storing them in a catalog or editing them, and also delivering these images in places where you want to. If it's for yourself, maybe it's to family or social media or something. If it's to clients, you have to deliver these images to clients. So this whole workflow, Lightroom is just one small part of that, and we need to focus on that. Then I'll do a very quick demo. I'm going to edit a couple of photos live, and you know what they say about live demos, but we're going to try and get it done perfectly and just show you a couple of edits and what the capabilities are. The idea of the demo is not to teach you how to do it step by step or give you a recipe right now. It's just to show you a little bit of what Lightroom is capable of. In future sessions, we will look in depth at all the different tools. We'll look at what step by step how to edit images, or what my workflow is in actual fact. Okay, so let's get started. And we'll also just at the end, I'll hint at some future sessions or topics that we might look at. You can give me your feedback on those as well, and we'll stop for questions right at the end. Perfect. So like I said, my background is I'm a photographer. I make money from it. So that obviously informs my workflow and the process for taking photos. And just to maybe again make that clear, there's very many different genres of photography, and the amount of editing and how we edit and how we do workflows will vary very much. So for instance, my workflow for getting a lot of images quickly to a client after a photo shoot might be very different to what a fine art photographer might do, spending hours or days or weeks on one image by itself to make that one image perfect, because that's what they're interested in. So just keep that in mind as we go through. Like I said, the volume of images that I do in a week is important, and it's important for me to have a really fast workflow, efficient workflow, and a safe, secure workflow to protect client images, because this is not only for me, this is client work, and some of it after the fact or after the event, we can't recreate them. So it has to be safe as well as a fast workflow. Okay, I do deliver a lot of my work for clients, although like photo walks and street photography is usually my own work, where it is my own work, and there I don't have clients, so I might do a bit of different editing there. I use a Mac and an iPad mostly for editing, once in a while my phone. That might also make a difference to you depending on what device you are editing on. The Lightroom and the version of Lightroom might be different to what I'm using, but I'm just telling you this so that you know what I'm using, and then you could match that up with my decisions on Lightroom. I use different cameras. That's also important. We just had in the comments somebody saying they're using the Canon software. So most camera brands would have their own software for working with raw images, which is great. The only thing is some of the features are very different between the different brands. So if you've got cameras of different brands, you might struggle editing in this way, where something like Lightroom will help a lot to standardize your images if you're using different cameras. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I am using different cameras from different brands. And then mostly I shoot in RAW, which is another thing to keep in mind when you're looking at my workflow. Sometimes JPEG, but mostly RAW. Okay, so if you're shooting JPEG, then your workflow might be slightly different to mine. Then I mentioned we'll have a quick look at philosophy. So editing style and your artistic style when it comes to your images is very personal. I believe it should be. It shouldn't be just a recipe you follow from somebody that you've seen on YouTube or something. Being able to have your own style and your own way of editing and your own way of photography is really important, I think. But then the next part, also because I deliver a lot of images to clients, there's also something, the client style. So specific brands might have specific types of images that they use, and their imaging might be edited in a very specific way. So in my case, personally, when I'm editing images, very often I'll be editing images to match other images from a client or their look and feel that they need for that specific whatever they're working on. So I can't just have my own style and my own little recipe that I want to follow. Very often I'd actually need to be able to think of a mood or look at other images and be able to match them. So that's important to me when I do my editing. Editing philosophy, the one thing I might edit to is for mood. So the one thing that might happen is it might have been a rainy day and I take an image and I get it back and it doesn't look like a rainy day. Very often the camera tries to compensate for low light and all these other things. If you do a lot of photography or you go on some other courses on camera settings and things, you'll know that in some of the modes, the camera will try and do its own thing and try and compensate for different light conditions. So you might have a very hot day and you look at the image and it doesn't look that hot, or you might have a rainy day and it doesn't look like a rainy day. So very often I would try to match mood of the actual circumstances where I took the image. So that's one reason I would edit. Sometimes I might want to change the mood. So if the client had a specific mood for a shoot, I might need to change the mood of an image. So that's the other thing. So mood is one. Clarity is another one. So if you're doing something like editorial or documentary photos, or you just need to tell a story or document some event or sports event or something, you might do your editing just for clarity, just to get things to get the focus of the image in the right place and for the image to be really clear and convey this message or story. So that's another reason you might be editing. Another one is fixing issues. That happens. Sometimes you get things wrong and you need to adjust a couple of things in an image just to fix stuff that you basically did wrong when you took the image, or the conditions were just such that even the camera couldn't give you the image you wanted, and then you might need to help it on and fix a few things with editing. So that's another reason to edit, is fixing issues. Speed. So part of my philosophy or my philosophy on editing is I need speed. That might not be applicable to you, but for me, that's very important. And then the other thing is that I like to stick to is I don't like to follow recipes. Although a lot of the time when people do Lightroom training or any editing training, there's a little recipe they go through and tell you adjust this until that happens, and then you adjust this. Basically, just following a recipe for me is not the way to do. I need to understand what all the tools do. And basically in my mind, I need to figure out what I want as an end product and then go with the tools and adjust things to get there. I don't want to just follow a set path of adjusting things in Lightroom to get to a specific result. I need to understand what I'm doing, but before that, I want to know what I want as the end image and then adjust to get there. So that's just another thing on philosophy. Then we're quickly going to look at some alternatives to Lightroom. The very first one, and a very good one in a lot of circumstances, is just shooting JPEG. So all the modern cameras will save JPEG, obviously. They've got color profiles built in. You can select things like vivid or natural or portrait or black and white, monochrome. You can select these color profiles. You can usually adjust things like contrast and sharpness. Sometimes you can even adjust shadows and highlights on some of the cameras. And then you've obviously got all your exposure settings and exposure compensation, all these things. And you could get a really good JPEG out of any modern camera. And that's a viable option if you rather not edit. JPEGs are a really good option. I know quite a few professional photographers that would shoot events, sporting events, all manner of different things, and deliver these images to clients, and they just shoot JPEG. The main advantage is there's no or minimal editing. And also you can deliver your final product to clients very quickly after you've taken them. Sporting events, you could start delivering during the event to your clients. So JPEGs is definitely a viable option for a lot of people. Also shooting sports or even wildlife where you need a very fast frame rate, then JPEG is smaller files, and generally cameras tend to do better writing JPEGs fast. So that's your first alternative to getting into editing images. Then you've got your camera software. So basically all the camera brands will have their own software for editing their raw images. So if you don't want to shoot JPEG and you want to do raw images, then you can use the software that your camera brand has got available, usually for free, and edit the raw images from there. Only issue that I do have with that is because I'm using different brands of cameras, I can't really go that way and match images and workflows easily. But it is a good option if you're just using one brand. Then iPhoto, so Apple's iPhoto, I'm sure there's alternatives to this. So just the built-in photo editor and catalog system that you've got on your phone or your mobile device, that usually you can get quite far just using that. And lately they have all got RAW support as well. So on the iPhones, I use Apple, so I know iPhoto well, but I'm sure in the Android ecosystem, you've got the exact same thing. I could upload RAW photos from my camera and they go into iPhoto and I can edit RAW images. So that's quite nice. So they've got all the profiles and things set up for the different cameras. Okay. Like I said, if you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat at any time. I will every once in a while have a look. Okay. Your next option, Photoshop. So some people, depending on what they do and how they use it, they see it as either Lightroom or Photoshop. I prefer using the two together. Very rarely do I use Photoshop, but when I need it, I really need it. And that's the only program really that can do the job for me. Lightroom is really good at handling lots of images, batch editing, doing the same edit on a lot of images, adjusting a lot of images in the same way, going through images and throwing out the ones you don't like, delivering a lot of images to a client. Lightroom's really good at that. Photoshop is extremely good at retouching single images. And it does a lot more in-depth retouching. So if you're doing a magazine cover, for instance, then Photoshop is probably the place where you want to spend your time, because you're editing one or two images and in-depth retouching it. The nice thing is Lightroom and Photoshop work well together, so you shouldn't really see Photoshop as an alternative, but depending on what sort of work you do, it might be your only editor if you're doing like single images and fine art images, things like that, then Photoshop would be good. You can do things like batching in Photoshop, but the way Lightroom handles big batches is just a lot easier and faster to work with than how Photoshop does it. Then Affinity Photo is another option. It's very similar to Photoshop. And again, it's not really a Lightroom alternative. Affinity has basically built a Photoshop alternative. Snapseed, that's a free one, works on mobile devices owned by Google. And again, mainly a Photoshop alternative and not a Lightroom alternative. Let's keep going. Photo Mechanic. So especially if you're shooting things like JPEG, then Photo Mechanic is a really good one. It handles big batches of images. You can go through them, select the ones you want, throw out the ones you don't want. And it basically works in normal folders on your hard drive. So it's some people also use this even before they take the images to Lightroom just to get rid of the really bad ones very quickly and very fast. But it is an alternative, but it's not an editor at all. It's really only a place to organize images, maybe backup images with Photo Mechanic, and also to go through large amounts of images to throw out the ones you don't want. Next, Pixelmator, again, Photoshop alternative. So a lot of companies have started building Photoshop alternatives, and this is one more. Not really a catalog system, it's more an editing software. Then we've got Bridge. Bridge is very similar to Photo Mechanic. So this is like the step you would use before Lightroom or before Photoshop, go through a lot of images, get rid of the ones you don't want. And it's, again, this one is folder based. And it's a good place to start if you're handling loads of images. But the idea from Adobe, this is an Adobe product, is if you do need Bridge, you use Bridge, and then you usually go to Lightroom. And after Lightroom, if you really need to do further editing, you'll go to Photoshop. So that's the sort of workflow there. Capture One, that's probably your best alternative to Lightroom. It's a very similar software. And the pricing is, again, very similar. Actually, Capture One is a little bit more expensive. But if you really want something else than Lightroom, that's probably your best bet. And also, pretty much everything you can do in Lightroom, you can do in Capture One and the other way around. So even when we're starting to do in-depth editing, Capture One, people will be able to follow along. On One Photo Raw, it's another alternative, although for me personally, I think it handling lots of images, it's slower than Lightroom. So for me, that's not the best solution. So for what I do and my workflow, it would probably be between Capture One and Lightroom, and then just the way Lightroom works just fits me a little bit better. Okay. Let's get to why Lightroom. Why is Lightroom good? Why do I use it? Why do I like it? So first off, it's the concept of Lightroom is that it should be something similar to working in a darkroom. Long time ago, if anybody did this and worked in a darkroom and developed their own film images, or if you used old film cameras and you developed your own images, then you would know how that worked. So you've got some control in a darkroom. You can do things like adjust contrast, adjust exposure. You can even dodge and burn a bit, so make certain parts of an image lighter or darker. And that's where the concept of Lightroom started. Also, we used to have things like contact sheets. So you'd have a big sheet with all your little images on. You could select the ones you wanted to print larger. And Lightroom does a similar thing there as well. So you can look at all your images and then pick the ones you want. So just the concept of it being sort of like a digital darkroom is quite nice. I like that idea. Just as a side note, a lot of my own images, like street photography images, I like to edit as if it was in a darkroom. So I set my own boundaries. So in Photoshop, you can do a lot of editing, intense editing. And even in Lightroom, there's some retouching that you can do that previously we wouldn't have been able to do in a darkroom. And I try not to do those on my own images, although for clients, it's a different story. Paying clients, the quality is usually a little bit above that, but I try to set myself a challenge of taking images so that I only need to do things that we used to be able to do in a darkroom to my own images. Anyway, side note. Then it works really well with Photoshop. So if you like Photoshop, if you use Photoshop, then Lightroom integrates very well with Photoshop. So you can do your bulk edits in Lightroom. You can do your sorting and your selecting and culling in Lightroom, and then edit some images in Photoshop that needs more editing, and then move them back to Lightroom. And it's really well integrated these days, especially with the new Lightroom. It round trips very easily, and you don't have to save things in a lot of places. It all works through this Adobe Cloud system they've got. Batch edits. So if you need to do a lot of edits to a big volume of images, you can batch edit really nicely with Lightroom. I like that a lot. That saves me time, which is obviously one of my priorities. Then selecting and culling, we've mentioned this before. So just going through these things and throwing out all the images you don't want, doing a rating system on images, the ones you like more, the ones you like less, backup images, these things. That's really easy with Lightroom. Then organizing and backing up, especially with the new Lightroom with the cloud system. The images can be on your laptop at your house. They can be on a mobile device, and they're also backed up at Adobe on their servers. So it's just, it's harder to lose an image or for something to go wrong in this whole ecosystem that they've set up now. The nice thing as well is I could do a client shoot at a venue or an event. I could use a little cable like this and pop an SD card in, pop it into my phone. And if there's Wi-Fi available at the venue, I could back up all the photos before I even leave the venue. And in South Africa, it's important, I think, to have these sort of workflows, especially if it's very critical images that you need to deliver to a client, events that won't happen again, these sort of things. It's nice to be able to, before you even leave the venue, to have another backup off-site far away that can't go away if something happens to your camera bag. Okay. Then the other nice thing with Lightroom, different to a lot of other editing software, is you do non-destructive edits. So when you're sliding sliders around and adjusting things on your image, you can always go back. These sliders and things, it sort of, it changes things on top of your image, and you can see the result. But you can just move those sliders or go back to the original places of those sliders, and you'll get back to before you started moving things around. In a lot of editing software, especially some of the Photoshop alternatives, some of the edits you do is destructive. So if you, for instance, do sharpening, then it gets baked into your image and you can't roll back unless there's some undos. And in a lot of cases, it's not easy going back. So you need to save an original file or an original layer and then duplicate that and then start editing on these. And it's not easy stepping back as it is with Lightroom. And with Lightroom, you'll see also a little bit later, you can have different versions of the same file and do different edits of the same image, which is quite nice. So having a non-destructive editing is really nice. Okay. Any questions at this stage? Just type a happy in the chat if you're still there, so I can see that we're happy to go on. All good. Great stuff. Glad you're still here. Shooting in RAW and the highest quality. I've got a question there. I'm trying to... Great stuff. Thanks. I see all the happies. Okay, I had a question there, shooting in RAW and the highest quality. So the largest file, literally the largest file you can get out of your camera would be a RAW image, which means that's exactly what your sensor sees. There's no processing done to it, or theoretically there's no processing done to a RAW file. It's supposed to be the raw data from what the sensor sees. So there's no white balance baked in, although the camera's white balance will be saved, like sort of, you can imagine it to be some info is saved next to the file, but it doesn't influence the actual file or the image. So you get things like metadata like white balance and color profile and things that your camera was set at that's recorded with the image, but it's not baked into the image. So you get all this raw data, and you can decide if you want to apply all these things like the white balance that was set by your camera, or you could just pick another one. So if you're going for the biggest file with the most information, and if you're seeing that as the highest quality file, then yes, saving a raw image and taking raw images will give you the biggest file with the most opportunity to maybe do some edits to it. Although I've happily done JPEG edits in Lightroom before. You are a little bit more limited, and you've got a little bit less leeway when you start moving things around. Because the JPEG file is a lot smaller, there's a bit less information in there. Things like dynamic range and all sorts of technical things are different, and so that makes the JPEG image smaller. But in a lot of cases, what we deliver to clients anyway is just edited, pretty high resolution JPEGs, which means if I get my settings right in my camera, I can also go for a JPEG and deliver that, and the end product would be very similar. Yes, Colette asks if you're shooting fine. So fine would only influence your JPEG. Fine will not influence your RAW. So in your camera settings on most brands these days, you can go, you can select fine as the highest quality image, and the other option, or together you can do RAW. So you can do something like a RAW file plus a fine JPEG, just a fine JPEG, or a RAW file, or you could go a lower resolution in your JPEGs, like changing the fine. Fine will not have an influence on your RAW. Your RAW will always be the same. Doesn't matter what JPEG resolution you're selecting. So if you're shooting both, which is a good idea, you can do JPEG fine with RAW, and you've got both options. If your JPEG is fine, you can deliver that or tweak that for your client. If there's an issue, you can always fall back onto your RAW and start editing that, which is more involved, but you've got a bit more leeway to save something that might not be ideal. Happy, all good. Great, hope that answers that question. But just to, in connection with Lightroom, Lightroom's happy using JPEGs or RAW images, although I think if you want to use really in-depth editing in Lightroom, you're probably a little bit better off starting from a RAW. You get a little bit more leeway on what you can adjust and how far you can adjust it. Yeah, so I've got another question before we move on. If you've only got photos shot in auto on your camera, will you still be able to edit it? Absolutely. Nothing stops you from editing images captured on auto. And yeah, there's lots of different opinions on what modes you should be shooting in, but in many circumstances, auto or even program shift mode, which is to me a little bit better than auto, but very similar to auto, will give you a very good result. If you're doing things like street photography, the program shift mode, which is pretty much, well, with a few changes, it's very similar to auto. That will get you a really good image, and you might not even be able to get that image if you're doing it yourself. It's nice if you're able to. I think it's a good skill to be able to do manual and all sorts of exposure modes, but knowing when to trust the camera, knowing when you need to make some changes is half the battle, I think. And in a lot of cases, trusting the camera and knowing that the camera will do a good job is definitely an option. So if you're shooting auto, nothing wrong, and you can definitely edit your images. Like we said previously, you might not, even if the camera did a good job of the exposure, you might want to edit for mood. You might want to edit for doing a different fix, removing something in the image, these sort of things, editing for clarity. The camera might do a good job, but you might be able to enhance it, especially when it comes to mood and style. You might be able to do a few things with those auto images. Okay, let's keep going. Demo, time for a demo. Let's see, like I mentioned before, there's many sayings about doing live demos and why you shouldn't, but we're going to try and see if we can do this. So this is my MacBook. This is Lightroom. In one of the future classes, we'll go through all the tools that Lightroom has got, how they work, why we would use them, which circumstances we would use them. We're going to be looking at workflow from bringing in the images, how to organize them, how to put them in different organization systems, how to go through a lot of images and only keep the ones you like or favorite the ones you like. We'll do all these little things and in-depth different scenarios of editing in previous ones, but we've only got an hour and I want to keep some time for questions. So I'm going to move fast and just show you a few things that Lightroom can actually do. I'm starting with this image, and you'll see some of these images we're going to do twice, just so that I can show you when you're editing for mood or for a vision you've got, then you've got different places to go with the exact same image. So this is a Johannesburg image that I took in the city, and there's some nice options here because there's some light areas, some dark areas, and we can go different ways with this edit. This is exactly as it was downloaded from my camera. Just so that you know, my Lightroom is set up, and you can change this in your settings. Mine is set up to try and replicate what the camera was set at. So if I set my camera's color profile to black and white, even though I bring in a RAW, Adobe will show me a black and white or a monochrome image. This is a RAW image though, and even though I've set my camera to black and white or monochrome, when I took the image, I can still get the color information back because it is a RAW image. So I could go to a different color profile, in this case, just Adobe Color, and you'll see I've got a color image. So the raw data was still there. Adobe just tried to match the color profile that I actually selected in my camera. Okay. So when I looked at the back of my camera, I had a monochrome image, and that was what Adobe imported for me or matched once it came in. You can also set this by default. If you've got a color profile you always like, you can set it when your raw images come in to always use that specific color profile. One of the other classes, we will also look at color profiles. We'll discuss what LUTs do. A lot of people talk about LUTs. We'll look at presets. We'll look at how you can create your own presets, which I think is a good skill. But for now, we're just going to say the raw that came in is actually a color file. And if I select Adobe Color, which is a color profile for the color, it will come in like this. And there's some options as well. I've got some extras installed, but you can, so you can install different color profiles, but you can also select this color profiles that's built into Adobe Lightroom. So you can do standard, portrait, natural, vivid, all these ones that you would probably find on the back of your camera in the menus as well. So hopefully most of you know how to switch that on your camera, especially if you're taking JPEG images that will influence what the image looks like. And right here in the top of Lightroom, we can do that. For this first image, I'm just going to go like for a really quick edit, just adjust things quickly, just to show you two different results from this image, what we can get. And this first panel, we'll still have a look at it at a later stage, but this first panel basically is all about light. So the dark areas, the light areas, the in-between areas, that's what we'll see here. As I said, in one of the future ones, we'll look at all these panels and what every single adjustment does. Today, we're just going to quickly do a couple of adjustments to get it to something that I like. I'm just going to do this as well. So before I started editing this image, I had an idea in my head of what I wanted from it. And what I'm basically, the only thing that I'm doing is because I know the tools, I'm trying to get my edit to what it looks like in my mind. I want the mood and the feeling. And so in this case, a little bit of a moody, contrasty sort of image that's Johannesburg. So again, you don't have to use all the sliders in Lightroom, and also you don't have to go to the extremes with these sliders. Very often in Lightroom, a little bit of tweaks, a little bit of adjustments can go a long way. You don't have to completely destroy your image, like just moving stuff around. If you use Lightroom, you might know some of these adjustments that I'm doing. And that's pretty much what I'm happy with. Obviously, I can sit here and tweak it more, but for a quick 1 or 2 minute edit, that's where we've got it. So that's where I'm at now. This was the image as it came from my camera, obviously just with a monochrome color space applied to it. Let's go to the next one. This one I'm going to do in monochrome. I'm going to crop first. There's also shortcuts you can use, like keyboard shortcuts. That's quite handy to use. Might want to straighten it a tiny bit. So as you use Lightroom, as you get used to the shortcuts, you will start to work faster, which is quite nice. And as you go through the tool, sometimes it helps just moving something like left and right a tiny bit just to see what you're doing. You can go different ways. You'll see me in this specific image. I'm actually hiding some of this detail on the left. So there's a lot of area in this image that I think it's nice if it's just open space, clear space, nice dark and black. So I'm basically taking this all away. I'm not, let me show you what I can do. If I'm lifting the shadows, I can get all the detail back in that building on the left. If I'm going left with the shadows, I can actually hide it. And a lot of people, when they teach you little recipes, they might tell you to just lift the shadows, drop the highlights, things like that. But I think understanding why you're doing it gives you more options. So in a case like this, I actually don't want to do that. Although in a lot of other cases, that might be what I intend to do if there's detail there that I want included. In this case, I like that space there, that negative space. And we're just doing a really quick edit. What I also... Sometimes also that what I find is because I also use film cameras, and I sometimes once in a while edit some of those images in Lightroom as well after scanning them. Sometimes the new digital cameras are just too sharp and there's too much detail, and dialing that detail a little bit back is actually not a bad thing. So I find myself very often editing actually just getting rid of some of the too much detail that might be in these digital files. I think that should about do it. I'm happy with that. That's good. Okay, so that's my next edit. So it started off looking like this. Not a bad image straight from the camera. I did a pretty good job, but just enhancing it a tiny bit, getting rid of some of the detail. I think the focus now is exactly where I want it. When I'm looking at this image, my eye goes straight to the guy there in the little corner of light, which I quite like. A little bit moody, him walking off into the dark side. And next image. So we're moving quickly. Here's another one that it's got color information, it's raw. I find that I very often, especially when doing photo walks, I set my camera to monochrome because it's easier for me to see the exposure, the shadows, the light, these sort of things. Also, very often doing portraits, even in studio, I might switch my camera to monochrome. Although it saves a raw, I know I've got all the information there that I might need in the raw file. So if I'm editing out a color image, I can still do that. Let me quickly show you how I would do that. We can change this one. We can go vivid on this. So it's got a few different color profiles, just like your camera has got. Just straighten it out. For some reason, I very often shoot with a slight slant. Anybody else do that? You will know who you are. I very often get home with a lot of images and they're all slanted the exact same 4 degrees, the same side. And I just do a batch adjustment to all of them. Okay, so this one is adjusted. It's already getting there. It's close to what I would like. Maybe I want a little bit, it was a rainy day, so I might want to make it a little bit less contrasty, maybe fade it a tiny little bit. So just get rid of some of the colors because it was a bit of a gloomy day. Now, this is where you can go different ways with this edit. You could make it more bright, more vibrant. There's some nice reds and blues in here. But what I would like to do for this specific one to get the mood I want is just to tone it down a tiny bit and sort of fade away the colors a tiny bit. That's all good. I'm just going to, so what my camera did is it tried to do a white balance here, and I'm just going to make it a little bit cooler because it's a nice rainy day. With the reds in the middle, it actually balances the cooler part of the rest of the image quite nicely. I'm even going to drop my vibrance a tiny bit. One of these sessions will also talk about the difference between vibrance and saturation. They're quite similar, but there's some key differences. And then I'm just adjusting the red a tiny little bit. And sometimes, like I said, a little goes a long way. There we go. Any questions so far? I've got a question. So how would you do a monochrome image with just the umbrella in color? So with Lightroom, that's pretty easy to do. We can do that in one of the classes as well. So that's selective color. Very easy to do. You can basically, one quite easy way, if there's only red in the umbrella and the jersey here, we can basically take all of these colors in Lightroom and we can just drop the saturation. So for instance, if I go to blue and I drop the saturation in the blues, I can completely get rid of blues in my image, just like that. So that's one way to do it. If the color you are looking for is just in one place in the image, then that's a quick way. You can also do it with masking and applying desaturation on a mask. Okay, so that's another image edited pretty close to the way I would like it. I'm going to show you another color version of the exact same image just to show you we can go in a different direction. And this is where looking at your image, thinking about where you took it, what you did, what you felt, what your emotion was, I think is important. And also thinking about the end result. What message do you want to convey? What sort of mood do you want to convey? There's hundreds of different or thousands of different ways of editing the exact same image, but all of these different edits would convey a slightly different mood or style. And I think it's important to make sure you know where you want to go with it. So we're going back to color. In this case, we can actually go camera vivid. So this tries to match my camera's vivid setting when I put it on color vivid. We can actually do a little bit of this. So now we're going for a much more colorful image. What we're trying to do is get some contrast in there. So this is going to be a very different edit to what the previous one was. Lots of detail. Not that much. Bringing a lot of detail into it. So I'm sort of giving you the opposite option of the previous image. We can again adjust the reds a tiny bit. I'm going to skip most of this. I'm just going to give us a little bit more detail again. Not much. A lot of things like clarity and sharpening and things in Lightroom you might find can easily be overdone. And very often, just a little tip, once you've done an edit, don't give it to anybody. Let it rest a while, go and have a coffee, maybe take a day or two on it, and then look at the image. It's a good tip, especially if you've over edited an image. When you come back to it, you'll see that, and you can just dial down some of the sliders again. Okay, so that's the next edit. So comparing this sort of faded, more maybe film look a little bit to this look that's a lot more bright and vibrant, and it's got a lot more detail to it. So that's two different options, same image. I quite like this one. It was a gloomy, rainy day, and I think this one conveys the message to me. But this one might be what a lot of people prefer because there's just sort of assault you a little bit. Okay, two more, last two images. Hang on, I've got a question. How would you mute the stark white of the shopping bag? Okay, so we've got this really white shopping bag. In Lightroom, we can do specific adjustments with masking and try and get to just that shopping bag. What I prefer doing in most cases is using global adjustments as far as possible because it's a lot faster editing that way, and you can also batch edit a lot of images exactly that way. So if I was just worried about the whites in this one, and if the shopping bag is really the only thing that I'm worried about, I can always just drop my whites, and that would change the shopping bag into something more resembling like a very light gray. If I pick it up, my whites will start getting really, really white. So that's one way of doing it. And this white slider is just adjusting the right-hand side. So this is the whites, this is the blacks. And again, in one of the future trainings, we'll have a look at this histogram and what it does and what it shows us. But what it's showing me now is there's nothing completely white in this image. So that white shopping bag is just off-white, like a little bit towards gray. Okay, next image. We've got a little city skyline, little panorama, and again, we're going to do two different options in an edit, two different ways we can go. So I'm going to go for, in this case, Adobe Landscape. It's a bit of a landscape shot. I'm going to see how much detail for this edit. I'm going to focus on detail and really try and get a lot of detail in this shot and enhance it in color. I'm going to do this exact same one in monochrome and then go for a much more moody, bit more of a silhouette edit, just to show you from the exact same image, we can get to different places if we know what we want. It's not a question of just coming to Lightroom and adjusting things and seeing what they do. The idea with Lightroom is understanding the tools and then moving the correct ones to get to the end result you want. So this one, like I said, we're going to see how much detail we can get into it. And get some contrast into it. There's different ways of adjusting the tones in Lightroom. There's quite a few different ways. You can do tone curves. You can use these light sliders in this basic panel. There's quite a few different places where you can achieve very similar effects. That's close to what we want. And the nice thing with Lightroom is if my global adjustments aren't getting me exactly where I want to be, I can also do local adjustments like in specific places of the image if I want to. We'll get to that just now. I'm pretty happy. This is starting to look like we've got a lot of the detail back. If you look at where we started, it was the bottom of the image was a little bit underexposed because I tried to keep some of the detail in the clouds. And because of that, I had to lighten up a lot of this bottom part of the image. And it might have pushed the top part a little bit far, but we'll fix that just now. Put a little bit of, it was a tiny bit hazy, so a tiny bit of dehaze will also help a bit. One thing with sharpening is I don't want to be sharpening any clouds. It's not a good idea. We're getting there. Our hour is just about up, so this is a quick edit. What I can do just to finish it off quickly, I might spend a lot more time on this one, but I'm just going to show you quickly what Lightroom is capable of. One more after this, I'm going to do a 30-second edit on the next one. And I'm just adjusting my clouds there. Good, that should about do it. So that's my edit on this one. That's where we started. That's where we are now. A lot more detail in the clouds, a lot more detail in the foreground. And we're going to do a quick monochrome, like a silhouette one on this one, because that's the opposite way that we can go. Adobe monochrome. So I've selected a monochrome color space, and now I've lost all my color in the final image, which is exactly what I want. I'm going to pick up the contrast quite a bit for this black and white image. I'm going to drop my shadows. So we've got some detail in the clouds. I'm going to drop my blacks. So we're going for a nice silhouette type moody image. And all this with just 5 or 6 little sliders, we're getting to where we want to be. And maybe if I really want to just get rid of some more detail in the foreground, I can just pop a little linear mask here and also even drop the exposure more on that. So there we go. And that's just to quickly show you what we can do. So we started with an image like this, and we've got a nice silhouette skyline with some clouds over it. I hope this shows you what can be done. Yes, we've got a suggestion of future training to do a lot of these tools, which is exactly one of the things I want to do. Let's jump into that quickly. So that was the demo. Let's get to future sessions. So future sessions, because we've got 1 hour a week, we want to spend it wisely. We want to go quickly, but I want to have time to answer some questions. One possible one is looking at the settings and the actual workflow, getting your images in, organizing them, sorting the bad ones out, and then getting to the good ones and how you back them up and all these things. Then another one is tools and panels. So all these things that I just used, all these different panels for light and for color and for adjustments, and we'll have a look at each single one, make sure we understand what they do, because having this vision of where I want to go with my image, I can only get there if I know these tools. They're not complicated. The one good thing about Lightroom is there's a nice flow to it. If you're working top to bottom, you're basically working in the right order and you'll get all this done. So just reading the names and going through them should remind you of what they're doing and if you need it on that specific image. So it's a very nice workflow, just going through the tools panel top to bottom. You don't need to use all of it. You just use the relevant tools that you might need. Then we'll have a session, I think, on fixing common issues. So common issues in images that we take that we might need to fix in Lightroom, we'll look at those. We can look at profiles and presets and how to create presets. By that time, we should know the tools, we should know how Lightroom works, and we might want to do the same sort of adjustments to multiple images. So a preset might be good. We'll have a look at all those. Color profiles and presets, that is. We'll look at mood and style. So how to get to convey a specific mood from an image. We might try to match mood with other images. We might just have an idea of what we want to communicate with an image and then try and get our image to do exactly that. So that's another session that we can do. There's all sorts of different suggestions that came up today already. I'm going to have a look at those as well. If you've got more suggestions, you're welcome to pop that in the chat. I'll have a look. Best way to set up your catalog folder. Yes. So when we're looking at workflow, I think this is, especially for me, working with a lot of images, working with images daily, it's the most important part of everything that I do on a daily basis, is making sure that I catalog my images correctly, that they're in the correct spots, that I can find them years later. If I do get a call from a client, there's so many different things going into making sure the workflow is correct, that stuff is backed up in multiple places. So from basically taking the image and taking the card out of my camera. From there until I deliver the image, that whole workflow is really important to me, making sure things are in the right spots and that I don't lose images, or that I can very quickly find the images that I need as well. Going through large volumes of images is really important to me. So that's definitely something we can look at. How to optimize your hard drive space. We can look at the settings as well, the import settings as well as the storage settings. So where are my images stored? Are they just on the cloud? Are they on my computer as well? Are they on an external hard drive as well? Where's Lightroom putting all these images? We can definitely look at that and optimizing that to make sure that maybe you've got a smaller hard drive built into your machine, but you're happy to connect an external hard drive to back up onto. Maybe you don't care about having every image on your own laptop, but the Adobe Cloud is a good place for you to store it. We've got many different options of where to store images, where to put them. We'll have a look at those as well. Definitely a good suggestion. Any more questions? No, it's only a pleasure. I'm happy to do this.
Hi.
So this is just this is an introduction. This is just to give you an overview of what Lightroom is, what it can do, where we can go with it. Is it for you? It might not be for you. I know a lot of people who don't use it and are really great photographers as well. So you need to decide if Lightroom is for you, and hopefully this gave you a bit of an overview. So the idea of this one, well, firstly, we'll have a recording available for this as well. But also the idea was not to memorize every slider I used. The idea of this was just to show you the capabilities. From the next one, we will really get into Lightroom and show you what each slider does, what all the settings does, how to get images in. Great. If there's nothing more, I'm going to end the session here. Thank you all for joining. I hope you'll be in the next ones as well. And if you've got any specific questions meanwhile, or if you want me to address specific questions in future sessions, you're always welcome to comment in the WhatsApp group. There's a WhatsApp group for this, and just pop a comment there and I'll be able to address those questions as well. You don't have to wait until next week if you don't want to.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Great stuff. Have a nice evening, everybody. Thank you for joining.
Good night.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.